Hello, you're watching Hornbill TV's newsroom. The Nagaland Legislative Assembly's monsoon session is currently going on. It started on the 27th and is currently going to be adjourned sine die today. Well, over the past 3 days, the Nagaland Legislative Assembly has been a very impactful business session in which various range of topics affecting the Naga public is currently being discussed. Well, thanks to the various digital platforms present in the state, whatever is happening in the Nagaland Legislative Assembly is hugely being attracted to a lot of Naga public. There are huge contentious issues being discussed by the MLAs, the advisors and the ministers, and replies being given by the respective ministers and the chief minister on various topics, from the reservation system, from the road issue to the PMAG Act. All of these are being discussed, and also the contentious Nltp Act has also been revisited. Well, spokesperson of the Nagaland government had, before the assembly started, had made it known to the public that the Nltp Act of 1989 would be revisited. And on this particular contentious issue, there was a wide range of discussion where ministers, doctors, and even people from the law angle gave their point of view, in which a majority of them had said that this act needs to be revisited and there should be something done about the state receiving revenue in this sector. Well, now to talk about this contentious act and also the response that we received, or rather the NBCC and the church organizations gave over the government's willingness to actually revisit the Nltp Act, is out in the open. And now to discuss more on this particular issue and what was spoken in the Nagaland Legislative Assembly, we've got with us our associate editor Alngoli, and we'll be speaking to him more as to how the discussions went, what could be the ramifications of the discussions that took place over the past few days, and whether this is a way forward in which Nagaland can also benefit, or rather protect itself from this act. Well, thank you so much. Good morning, sir, for joining me on this newsroom. Starting off, sir, on that particular day when we discussed about the state government, or rather Nagaland spokesperson Minister KG Kenye speaking that they would revisit the Nltp Act, you had predicted that there would be 3 outcomes. The first one would be that the church organizations would come out and speak their mind over the government's decision to revisit the Nltp Act. The second would be who would get the license, and also the third, how is the revenue going to be checked? Well, you seem to have ticked the first box, in which the NBCC did give a reply. But over the past few days, this topic has been widely deliberated upon by various ministers giving their point of view. So how would you take this discussions, and also the fact that nowadays with the presence of digital platforms, the sessions and whatever is happening in the Nagaland Legislative Assembly is out for all to see, and for all the public to actually get in on what the MLAs and the advisors are discussing in. So how do you see this move, and do you feel that there could be an impact with the presence now that a lot of people have actually witnessed this conversation taking place in the Legislative Assembly?
Thank you, Akivi. All of us have seen the conversations that took place in the Assembly on August 27th.
Yes.
And there were a host of ministers and MLAs who aired their opinions in this regard. Now, I was going through the comments that they were making in the Assembly, and one thing struck me. If you would go through all their opinions, and if you will just give it a listen, you will notice that almost all of them, except, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Mr. KG Kenye and Mr. Achambimo Kikon, who talked about the liquor prohibition in Nagaland in terms of its support systems and revenue that might be part of the process in case the state lifts the act. Other than that, everyone was talking about only one thing, Akivi, and you may have noticed this too. They were talking only about the health,
Yes.
health impact, health issues, diseases, the medical concerns concerning the Nltp Act. So when I was going through these comments, I was thinking, I think it is a legislative imperative that we need to be the legislative imperative that we need to be addressing is whether we should be lifting it or not.
Yes.
And that argument can be made, that discussion can be made only on the premise of the support systems we have, fiscal management policy mechanisms that we have, auditing, revenue, enforcement, implementation. And I am not saying health is not important, because I believe that all of us are quite aware that liquor is something that is deeply connected to the health, the physical health of the people, but also the spiritual health of the community and the society. So it is important. But you are talking about something that directly concerns with the actions of the state, okay?
Yes.
But everyone was talking about the diseases, illnesses, but so far nobody has actually spoken anything about alternative to all the problems that not having the act is giving us. They were not talking about the solutions that we might need if we leave the act. So right now my opinion is that, and I will always stick to this, because I think there are a lot of senior journalists out there in Nagaland and even outside Northeast who are watching the situation unfold in the assembly in regard to liquor prohibition, IKV.
Yes.
And we all of us, we have seen this many times. We have seen this many times. 2003, 2018, 2008, 2015, 2018 or 17, and especially 2008 and 2009. And we have seen this in 2015 also. So it is not a new thing. I'm not bothered by all this fuss going on, because we have seen this many times. And I think all of us know why the government has suddenly started to talk about the Nltp activity.
All right, so I'm glad you pointed out about the unique features of the discussions on the Nltp Act. Well, I think I do agree with you with the fact that a lot of the ministers, the MLAs, the advisors spoke their mind, but a lot of them, majority of them actually spoke about the health, health impact and the dangers of spurious liquor. So in this regard, sir, if health is supposed to be at the center and leaving out the product or the act or the implementation or the regulation, well, if health was in, it was a matter of attention, why is it that only liquor got prohibited? Why aren't gutkas prohibited? Why aren't cigarettes prohibited? I think Nagaland has one of the highest cancer rates. Oral cancer is one of the biggest threats to our Naga community. We've got various administration, the police holding workshops on oral hygiene. We've got HornbillTV itself has spoken to a lot of dentists, a lot of doctors, and a lot of them have said that Nagas have this very unique habit of chewing betel nut, pan. We've got gutkas, you've got cigarettes. Why is only liquor attributed to health and not those items which are easily available in wholesale rate, that too? Every year there is a sin tax, the excise tax increases for products such as cigarettes, tobacco products. Why is there no concerted efforts even by the CSOs? They seem to be so concerned only for liquor, but not for other products such as cigarettes or bidis or gutkas. Why is that not a matter of contention, but why is only liquor a matter of contention, sir?
Very good question, actually. I was not expecting that. Because, actually, it's easier to talk about the symptoms than acting to treat the disease. Nobody is talking about what next after we leave the Liquor Prohibition Act.
Yes.
Nobody is talking about the infrastructural demands that is going to be part of the Nagaland that welcomes liquor. Nobody is talking about the medical support systems. Nobody is going to talk about the enforcement, the pressure on the enforcement mechanism. Nobody is talking about the legislative imperatives that will go into a proper policy that says that liquor sale or import or export is allowed in Nagaland. So it's easier to talk about something simpler like health. You're not talking about who is going to get the licensing rights. Is it going to be the big shots or the middle income class? So if we're going to implement the licensing for liquor, then who is going to be in charge of the enforcement and implementation? Because the state force in Nagaland is already under pressure, and I believe that the media observers across the nations have already pointed out the pressure that will come in case Nagaland leaves the Nltp Act. So first thing, to be very fair, the reason why the government cannot act on its own just like that unilaterally is because if we go back to the genesis of the Nltp Act way back 1989, this act was not just a legislation that came from the heart of the government. It came from the moral conviction of the church, who at the time believed that Nagaland as a young state is a Christian community, and our government and our value systems that has been given to us by the constitutional tools of India should reflect the Christian character of Nagaland. So there is a moral strain to this. It is not just a piece of legislation that a constitutional mechanism created just out of nowhere. So the reason the government cannot really go in all black and white even among the members is because, like I said, it is a subject that deals directly with the spiritual health of the society, and even the legislators, they understand that this is not something they can just let go with just discussions. So in regard to your pointing out many substances in our community, in our society today that are competitive to liquor, cigarettes, pan, gutkha, yes, there is so much hypocrisy in the state government in this context, Akivi. If you were not able to regulate tobacco consumption in Nagaland, cigarettes are everywhere, tobacco, gutkha everywhere, local wines and local beers and spirits, liquor, they are everywhere, and we have not been able to effectively check any of them, then I do not understand how we will be able to implement or enforce a Nagaland where liquor is sold freely. So in that context, I believe there is a hypocrisy that has to be erased, and a more logical discussion based on the merits or the demerits of the act should be discussed, and a solution arrived at from that line.
All right, so before the monsoon session actually started, when spokesperson Minister KG Kenya had given a press statement, or rather when he was speaking to the media, he had said that they would revisit the act, out of which there was another message going like a rumor, and it went like wildfire, that the Nltp Act could be partially lifted in certain areas. Well, when on the ground, the topic was not about what kind of act or what kind of regulations would be there, but rather the basic topic was that Nltp Act would be lifted in partial areas, so which means itu jaga de do mudu khao paribo. So in the fact that, so do you believe that the Nltp Act is not just about lifting the prohibition and allowing people to drink alcohol, but rather, don't you think it's a more complex process? There is regulation. You were just speaking about who's going to regulate it, how are the finances or the revenue, which department is going to regulate it, how are we going to find out how much revenue we are getting? If is Nagaland just going to lift the prohibition? Are we just going to become a consuming state, or are we going to become a manufacturing state? That too, who is going to legislate? Don't you think it's a very nitty-gritty process, and that even if deliberations started and a committee was formed, it would take a while for the act to actually be brought back to the House for further deliberations, after which the assembly could take a decision as to whether to lift it? Don't you think it's quite a complex process, and it's not just only about allowing to drink alcohol?
Right, it is a very complex process, and that is the reason why many of us in the media, we don't believe that the government of Nagaland will be lifting the Nltp Act. It's a very simple, or at least, even though it might be a speculation right now, we still do not believe, because just like you said, it is not simply passing an order saying, okay, liquor in Nagaland is now legal and everyone can go out and drink and party and have fun. It goes beyond that. You are going to do studies, you are going to engage in research, you are going to engage in financial assessment, outlays, who is going to enforce it, and what are the legal policy guidelines in this regard. Does it conform with the laws with the center? What are the implications of health? A lot of complex elements will have to come together here. You know, if you go to Facebook, right now everyone is talking about revenue. We are using the excuse of revenue just because we crave our desires to be fulfilled, but it is not as simple as the way we post it there. It is a very deep, a very complex and a time consuming process, and even the government of Nagaland knows this, and that is the reason why Mr. Kenya said revisit. He didn't even say we'll discuss, we'll debate. He said revisit. Let's have a look. Let's see, in case we lift up, you know, what's going to happen. Let's have a bird's eye view of the situation. He said revisit. He didn't say we'll lift it. And of course there were reports coming out that it will be partially, but that was just one of the speculations in that regard. There were speculations that it will be lifted across the state, but like you mentioned, it is not something that you just issue an order for and expect people to comply and everyone starts drinking. No, it is a very complex process that needs a lot of time, which I believe the government, in case they decide to lift the act, they are going to form a lot of committees, they are going to have consultation with communities, including the church, of course, and they are going to have a lot of sitting with policymakers at the center also, the legal fraternity. So even if they lift it, whether partially or not, I think it will take a lot of time, and it's not something that will happen just like that. And second, you mentioned about partially lifting the act in certain areas. I believe that the initial goal of the government before the discussion started was that they would try lifting the act in certain select areas of the state as a pilot project. And that is the reason why I believe Mr. Kenya said revisit. They are not going to go into this with all guns blazing, Akivi. They want to do something in the nature of a pilot project and see if it's successful, and if it looks okay, if it looks like it's going to work, then they are going to go all in. But like you said, it is not as simple. Maybe if they want to leave the Prohibition Act, maybe it'll take maybe a year or two. But for the media, for now, I believe that it will not be lifted.
All right, so now this question comes in two aspects. When we talk about the speakers who actually spoke their mind on the Nltp Act in this particular ongoing monsoon session of the Nagaland Legislative Assembly, taking into account one of the speakers, and that is the Bhandari MLA Achumbe Mukikon.
Mr. Kikon, yeah.
During his speech, he had said that as a student leader during his time, he had debated with a lot of the NBCC with regard to the Nltp Act. Well, one of the few things that he pointed out was that even America tried to do it, but they saw that there is an emergence of a lot of nefarious activities that comes with adoption of prohibition, which was detrimental. Rather, the act was supposed to be positive for the society, but it turned out to be very detrimental, after which, after the passing of 4 US presidents, the act had to be lifted. He also spoke about the negative impacts of prohibition. The second aspect of my question is the fact that what he gave suggestions to move forward with the act. He did quote a lot of figures, or rather he quoted a lot of the British Prime Minister. Well, he had also said that if we want to move forward, there will need to be a committee comprising of expert people, also people who have gone through the abuse, so that you will get a better aspect of it. And further, he noted that nowadays people, with the emergence of social media, one of the positive impact is that we tend to believe a lot of social media and the contents in social media. He also spoke about how people now are very conscious about their own health, so they control themselves from eating too much. Don't you think discussions like this, or rather pointers like this, could actually be a positive way forward than to rather just talk about health? Well, he also spoke about how the church should work on building spirituality among the Nagas and leave the legislation to the elected leaders. Isn't that also a point to be noted, sir?
Okay, to your first question, I think while we can look at other countries,
Yes.
for example, the United States, we can look at their living conditions or the impact that liquor is having on their communities. But I don't think there's a comparison because our cultural systems are different. Sweden, for instance, it is not illegal to have liquor there. And it is not illegal to have liquor in the UK, the US. But if you look at the way Denmark, Sweden, the consumption is much lower than the numbers in the United States and United Kingdom, and even in Assam also. If you, I don't have the right figures with me, but if I am not mistaken, the relevant figures with me right now, but if I'm not mistaken, there are comparisons, especially in Europe. When you compare yourself to countries where liquor is legal, and if you compare it to small communities like ours, I think that will be a mismatch because we cannot use their paradigms to describe our lives. So it might be that if we leave the act from Nagaland, we might start drinking a lot more than the Americans or the Canadians. Or our consumption might be a lot lower than maybe even Sweden or Denmark. So I think the comparison, it might give a broader picture of the impact of alcohol, but I don't think this is the right time to be speculating on what its impact would be because we don't know yet. We have not lifted the act. And then second, in regard to the contention that the church will have to focus only on the spiritual aspects of the society, then they're doing their job, to be very fair. Because if we are talking about spiritual aspects of the society, the church is actually doing that by standing against lifting liquor prohibition. And I tell you, and I always say this, people who say that God should not be in politics are people who have never read the Bible. The Bible is full of laws, conduct, behavioral conduct. It is full of governments and kings and administrations and governors, value systems, legal systems, justice, taking care of the poor and the downtrodden, taking care of even foreigners. You are not to overeat, you are not to do this or that, you are not to get drunken. So people who say that church people should not interfere, and I'm not saying they should come in and take part in the legislative process. I'm just saying that if there is no church to be the moral compass for us, then we are a lost community. And I think it is far-fetched. If we're going to tell the church, take care of only of the spiritual matters of the community, if we're going to tell them that, then they're doing their job, in fact, by telling us that we should not drink. And that's them taking care of our spiritual matters. So I think that is something, while the line is very blurred, we have to make a distinction there.
All right, so how about the last question, in which do you feel that with more suggestions rather than talking about health and rather what's the next move ahead or what step, don't you think suggestions like this are more welcomed rather than having to talk about the impact of this and or rather on your health? Don't you think it's better to have suggestions to move forward and try and at least just have a revisit as to how this act could move forward, or whether committees should be formed, who will be part of the committees, what kind of detailed studies are are they going to do? Don't you think suggestions like this are much more welcomed and valued rather than having to talk about the impacts which we've known from 1989?
Yeah, definitely. If the government decides on going ahead, seriously going ahead with this, whether to lift or not to, I think right now, I believe that they will have to defer these discussions and they will have to consult with the people first. Yes. And I believe that, just like you said, this is not something that you have to take decision in just one sitting. Yes. You have to get in touch with the community leaderships. You have to get in touch with the hosts. You have to talk to the church, and you have to talk to legal experts. So there is a lot of process here that will demand a lot of inputs before we arrive at a solution or at the conclusion of this topic, whether to lift it or not. So definitely it will take time, and like I said, this is not a new thing, especially for journalists like us who have been covering assembly situations for like 19-20 years now. So I do not believe that the government will take any concrete decisions in this regard, but if they do, they'll have to go to the people first for consultations.
All right, thank you so much, sir, for joining me on this morning's newsroom and giving us your point of view and also what you feel of the discussions that took place in the Nagaland Legislative Assembly, especially on the topic of the Nltp Act 1989. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was our associate editor, Anguli, and he just shared his point of view, stating that the topic of the Nltp Act 1989 has been deliberated upon on almost all Nagaland Legislative Assembly sessions. Well, at least this time around, with the emergence of digital broadcast media, well, more people seem to be adept, or rather, their eyes hooked to the screens as to what the ministers and the honorable members of the House had to say, especially regarding this act. We also heard a lot of MLAs and advisors speak their heart out on the Nltp Act, in which a lot of the ministers spoke about the impact of alcohol in one's health, while there were a few speakers that also spoke about what could be the road ahead for Nagaland when it comes to this regard of whether liquor should be prohibited or whether the prohibition should be lifted. Well, apart from this, here is a small clip where HornbillTV is not advocating nor condemning, but here is just a small extract from the speech of Bhandari MLA Achumbe Mukhikon, which could be the thought of the day.
Let me conclude with, since I've started with Winston Churchill, when he was asked, what do you mean by whiskey? I'll just read out the relevant one only. It's a very long one. If you mean that evil drink that topples man and woman from the pinnacles of righteous and gracious living into the bottomless pit of degradation, shame, despair, helplessness, and hopelessness, then, my friend, I'm opposed to it with every fiber of my being. However, you know, Winston Churchill is a Nobel laureate. He's known for his literature. However, if by whiskey you mean that the drink that enables man to magnify his joy and to forget life's great tragedies and heartbreaks and sorrow, if you mean that drink, the sale of which pours into our treasuries untold millions of pounds each year, that provides tender care for our little crippled children, our blind, our deaf, our dumb, our pitiful, aged, and infirm, to build the finest highways, hospitals, universities, and community colleges in this nation. And, my friend, I am absolutely, unequivocally in favor of it. See, how can we forget revenue? There will be enough revenue. And we will be building, without depending on the government of India, a lot of facilities for our aged, for our children, for our women, for our disabled. So many things can be done out of this.
And that was all for this hour's bulletin. For more topics like this, keep watching HornbillTV. Goodbye.